On November 6, 2024, former U.S. President Donald Trump was elected by American voters to return to the White House. The world is wondering, how will the China-U.S. ties go in the next 4 years? Some say the two countries cannot avoid falling into Thucydides Trap.
And the idea is that when a rapidly rising power seriously threatens to displace a major ruling power, you get a great disruption. And the result of that great disruption is most often war.
Since formal ties were established in 1979, China and the U.S. have witnessed rapid advancements in bilateral economic and trade relations, advancements which have benefited both sides and have boosted world economic growth. But it's been no secret that this important relationship still has many obstacles in some areas.
So in the last 500 years, 16 times a rapidly rising power seriously threatened to displace a major ruling power. In 12 of those cases, the outcome was war. In 4 of the cases, the outcome was not war.
History seems to prove the answer is no. Can the U.S. and China also avoid the tragedy? By 1890, the U.S. had overtaken the British Empire as the world's most productive economy, with an annual GDP growth averaging around 4% during that period. By comparison, China's average GDP growth remained at over 10% each year for 3 decades beginning in 1980. At such a lightning pace, it took China only 17 years to transform from an economy at about 1/16 of U.S. GDP in 1993 to the world's second largest economy by 2010. Measured in U.S. dollars, China's GDP reached 77% of that of the U.S. in 2021. It's the first time in 130 years the United States has faced a competitor whose GDP exceeded 2/3 that of the U.S. China's phenomenal economic performance began to raise alarms in the U.S.
And when the global market is flooded by artificially cheap Chinese products, the viability of American and other foreign firms is put into question.
In March 2018, the U.S. slapped 10 to 25% tariffs on some Chinese imports and restricted China's investments in the U.S. based on the so-called Section 301 investigation. In April this year, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative initiated a Section 301 investigation of China's acts, policies, and practices supporting its maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding sectors. Over the past few months, the U.S. has also been hyping the overcapacity narrative against Chinese electric vehicles, and based on this accusation, it imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese EV products, which went into effect in late September 2024. Apparently, the U.S. has shifted to countering China. The U.S. currently defines China as the most serious strategic competitor it has ever faced. In late 2022, the White House released the National Security Strategy, identifying China as the only competitor with the technological power to reshape the international order. Observing today's China-U.S. relations, what would Thucydides say?
I'm afraid he would say both parties are right on script, almost as if each is trying to show which can better exemplify the role of the rising power or the ruling power, accelerating towards what he expects would be the grandest collision of all times, sort of sitting on the edge of his chair. So I would say, unfortunately, we're more at risk today than we were then.
However, risk doesn't necessarily lead to confrontation.
China's going to become a much more powerful country, and that will lead to confrontation. And I read that and I thought, no, it's good if China rises. That's good. Win-win.
While extending congratulatory messages to President-elect Donald Trump, Chinese President Xi Jinping noted that the two countries should find the right way to get along in the new era. so as to benefit both countries and the wider world.
China has long understood that cooperation is key for the two countries to get along. Take a look at these economic figures.
Over decades of positive cooperation, trade volume between China and the U.S. skyrocketed from $5 million in 1971 to $560 billion in 2015, making China the U.S. top trading partner. According to the 2024 U.S. Exports to China report by the U.S.-China Business Council, an estimated over 930,000 American jobs were supported by exports of goods and services to China. In the latest survey of the over 70,000 American companies in China, 80% earned profits last year. Looking ahead, 72% of the companies expect the profit margins of their China operations will be equal or greater than their global average in 2024. The nearly $760 billion in bilateral trade and over $260 billion in two-way investment reveals the tight synergy between the two countries in their economic structure and connectivity in global industrial and supply chains.
It was the inevitable outcome of the international division of labor in the globalized world and the rational decision-making within the business communities of both nations. But in 2018, calls came from the U.S. to decouple from China, followed later by the less severe approach of de-risking. Then came the call for building small yards with high fences around critical technologies. But what good have such efforts done for the United States?
The U.S. said its reasons for launching its trade war with China was to reduce the trade deficit. But data from the U.S. Department of Commerce shows that the U.S. goods deficit hit over $1 trillion in 2023, way higher than the $891 billion level before the trade war. By the latest figures, the U.S. goods and services deficit in September had widened to a two-year high, hitting $84.4 billion. But what's far worse is that American companies are at risk of losing an important overseas market. Take chips, for example. China is the world's largest semiconductor market, and the revenue from China once accounted for about 20% of all revenue for U.S. chip company NVIDIA. Because of U.S. export restrictions on advanced AI semiconductors to China, NVIDIA's sales in China decreased as a percentage of total revenue to a middle single-digit percentage in the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2024.
In a business sense, it would seem unwise for the U.S. to try to encircle or surprise China. But if they choose a different path of working together, China and the U.S. could unlock huge opportunities for the world.
Now, the two largest economies in the world have agreed to work together to raise climate ambition in this decisive decade.
Together, the U.S. and China represent 40% of the global GDP and contribute to over 50% of the world's growth. It's safe to say that the state of the China-U.S. relationship plays a crucial role in the global economy. China and the U.S. are both permanent members of the UN Security Council and major members of most international organizations. In terms of global challenges, they play an irreplaceable role in international and regional issues. In fighting climate change, China and the U.S. took the lead in the Paris Agreement in 2015. Later, in 2023, the two countries issued the Sunnylands Statement on enhancing cooperation to address the climate crisis, agreeing on issues like energy transition, greenhouse gas emissions, and the circular economy. Together, China and the U.S. played an exemplary role in promoting global climate governance. Therefore, the Thucydides Trap is something that the U.S. can and must avoid.
This year marks the 45th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and the U.S. History has proven that the essence of bilateral ties should reflect a drive for mutual benefit and win-win results, rather than a zero-sum game.
The world may learn a new system for governing, or the societies may learn a new system for governing. So I think it's unclear where the outcome is, except that they should each understand that coexisting is necessary